Ukrainians keep telling me, this is not about oil. Remember, Ukraine is strategic for Europe. Why? Because the majority of the oil and gas that the rest of Europe gobbles up, all coming from Russia. 40% of Europe's oil and gas comes from Russia. 50% of Germany's gas and oil comes from Russia. All of that has historically transited through the heart of Ukraine. That's why the Russians built the Nord Stream pipeline 1 and 2 that basically bypasses Ukraine and travels about 700 miles from the southwestern tip rather of Russia and connects to Germany. This was all strategic for the Russians because they knew eventually they had aspirations on Ukraine. And why do they have aspirations on Ukraine is this for this very reason, and the reason that I keep hearing over and over again, and I've heard it for the last 8 years. They say to me that this is a battle for freedom. It is all about freedom. The freedom that Ukrainians have experienced the last 30 years since the fall of communism. They've had a political freedom. They've had religious freedom. They've had economic freedom. Freedom from the totalitarian mindset of 70 years of communistic, dictatorial, harsh, we will think for you mentality. They broke away from that. And for 30 years, they blossomed. It wasn't easy in those early days, but they blossomed into this vibrant society. Now, there's a lot of corruption and all that stuff, okay? But let's put that aside for a second. But it is a vibrant society. And the Ukrainians will tell you this very DNA of Ukraine, post the collapse of Soviet Union 30 years ago, is a thorn in the side of Russia. Because Russia is the exact opposite, right next door to Ukraine. It is a totalitarian regime. There is no freedom. There is no economic freedom. Why? Because the oligarchs and the Putin and the oligarchs control everything. It's a corrupt system. There is no religious freedom. The Russian Orthodox Church pretty much rules the religious landscape. So it's the total opposite. And what Russia wants to do is to gobble up Ukraine. You know, when the Soviet Union collapsed 30 years ago, Vladimir Putin, a young Vladimir Putin who was a KGB agent who grew up in the ranks of the KGB, following the fall of the collapse of the Soviet Union, he said one of the greatest catastrophes, I'm paraphrasing, of the 20th century, in his mind, was the collapse of the Soviet Union. And people always talk about how Ukraine, being the breadbasket of the former Soviet Union, has always been in the crosshairs of Vladimir Putin. And I think it was several months ago, and we reported on this, several months ago, he sent a letter to every single member of the Russian military. And he said to them, every one of those soldiers, he said, Russia and Ukraine are one. Kyiv is the mother of all Russian cities, right? And the Russian and Ukrainian, it's all about Russia. It's about the Russian identity. Ukrainians are saying, excuse me? No, absolutely not. We have our own language. We have our own cultural history, our own religious history. We are not part of Russia. And so at the end of the day, what this boils down to is a mindset. And I'm not talking about democracy necessarily. I'm talking about freedom. I'm talking about the spirit of freedom, the freedom that is non-existent today in Russia. And mind you, the countries of Slovenia, Lithuania, Estonia, maybe even Poland, okay, but I'll put Poland to the side. All these countries are trembling in their boots tonight, potentially, if this happens, because Vladimir Putin will not stop with Ukraine. It may not happen in the next several years, but mark my words, he is not going to stop with Ukraine because he has this mindset, this desire, deep desire to reconstitute the empire, the Soviet Union empire. And as one person said to me, he said, I grew up in the Soviet system and the spirit of empire makes me sick. This is what he said to me. It makes me sick to my core, because in that spirit of communism and of this empire mentality is that you are completely controlled, and you have a ruler, you have a king who is supreme over all. And so it runs contrary to the DNA of Ukrainians today. And at the end of the day, guys, this is, if this happens, this is the battle. And what I think historians are going to say about this moment in history, if at all this happens, and I pray it doesn't, is that the West, the United States, along with NATO members, stood by and watched the Russian bear gobble up Ukraine.